Musicians, painters, artisans, cobblers, sculptors, writers. They all have tools that help them create amazing things. Instruments are crucial, instrumental for every single advancement we've made for society, from the hardy rock to the smartest of phones. For the best artists know their instruments. They can feel exactly why, where, what, when, and how their processes work. It was
once remarked by someone who was looking at the inkwell on an author's desk. Isn't it strange, all that can come out of an inkwell? I wonder what will come from it next. Oh, it is a wonder. That it is, agreed the inkwell. It is very hard to understand, and that has always been my opinion. The inkwell was talking to the pen and everything else that happened to be on the desk. It is indeed strange and wonderful what can come from out of me. Why, I would call it almost unbelievable. Sometimes I don't even know myself what will come next, what will happen when human beings dip into me. One drop of me is enough to cover half a page of paper. And what cannot be written on that? I am someone quite extraordinary. From me springs all poetry, descriptions of people who have never lived and yet are more alive than those who walk around on two legs. The deepest feelings, the greatest wit, and the loveliest word paintings of nature. How can all that be inside of me? I, who do not even know nature, but nonetheless it is. All these gallant knights on their magnificent horses. Yes, I cannot even understand it myself. There you spoke the truth, said the quill pen. You do not understand because you cannot think. If you could, you would realize that you contain merely liquid. You exist so that I can express upon paper the thoughts that are within me, so that I can write them down. It is a pen that writes. This no man doubts. And I can assure you that most human beings have a great deal more insight into poetry than an old inkwell. You have not had much experience yet, said the inkwell. You are young in the service, though already half used up, I'm afraid. Do you really believe that you are the poet? You are only a servant. I have known all kinds of pens. I cannot even count the number that have been in my service, and more will come, I am sure. He wears them out, the human being who does all the manual labor, he who writes down what is inside me. I wonder what he will lift out of me next. Ink tub, sneered the pen. Later in the evening, the poet came home. He had attended a concert where he had heard an excellent violinist play. He was still very excited about what he had heard. The musician had enticed such marvelous sounds out of his instrument. At one moment, it sounded like drops of water falling from the trees, one pearly drop after another. And the next, like a storm riding through a pine forest, the poet had thought he had heard his own heart weeping. So captured had he been by the music. It was not only the strings that had sung, but the whole instrument, wood and all. And all the while it had looked so easy. The bow had danced so lightly across the strings. One was almost convinced that anyone could have done it. So effortless had the performance appeared. The violin sang by itself, and the bow moved by itself. The two were one. One almost forgot their master, the musician who played upon them and gave to these two dead objects a soul. But the poet had not forgotten him. He pondered over it and wrote down his thoughts. How absurd it would seem if the bow and the violin should be proud and haughty about their accomplishments. Yet we, human beings, often are. The poets, the artists, the scientists, and even the generals often boast in vain pride, yet they are all but instruments that God plays upon. To him alone belongs all honor. We have nothing to pride ourselves upon. Later, the poet wrote a parable and called it The Genius and His Instrument. "Well, madame, that put you in your place," said the pen to the inkwell when the two of them were again alone. "I suppose you heard him read aloud what I had written down?" "You wrote what I ordered you to write," retorted the inkwell. "It was especially your silly arrogance and pride that made me think of it, I am sure. But I suppose you can't even understand when you are being made fun of. That whole thing was meant for you, and it came from the very depth of me. Don't you think I can recognize my own sarcasm?" "Ink skirt!" screamed the pen. "Scribble pen!" shouted the inkwell. Each of them thought his own repartee the cleverer, and there is nothing so satisfying as the feeling that one has had the last word. It makes for pleasant slumber, and both the inkwell and the pen went to sleep. But the poet was not asleep. Like tones from a violin, thoughts upon thoughts came to him. They fell like pearls and rode through the forest as the storm. He felt the cry of his own heart and the spark of the eternal master. To him alone belongs the honor
and the glory. That was Pen and the Inkwell by Hans Christian Andersen, the guy that wrote classics like The Little Mermaid, The Ugly Duckling, The Ice Queen, the inspiration for Disney's Frozen. You know, Hans Christian Andersen. Anyways, the story makes a good point. The writer wrote the story, not the pen or the inkwell. And we should not discount ourselves as instruments in another's art either. For example, with a leader, we are instrumental for their plans. It is not often you would see a movie made by the lead actor. Well, I guess it's not impossible, but it's less likely. In most cases, the actor is responsible for their character and the director the movie. But why did the director do what he did? Well, they may have been inspired by someone. Would that mean the movie should be credited to the influences that made the film? Who influences you and what you do? What makes you you are your influences. Embrace that. Never forget. Never forget where you came from, what makes you unique. Remember that you're the only person who ever can be you.